the OBR Roundtable. I'm your guest, Corey Gaudreau, and if you've been tuning into the OBR this week, we've been focusing mainly on the week that was a devastating loss to the hands of the AFC champion Kansas City Chiefs. But tonight on the Roundtable, we're bringing in a number of the OBR experts to look forward at the next week matchup, the home opener against the Houston Texans. We've got our film expert, Jake Burns, coming in to break down the Houston Texans. We've got Fred Greedham, got his thoughts to share on David Njoku. And as always, we'll bring in the web dork to go around the rest of the AFC North. But as always, to start off, we've got our original, as we always start off, we've got our news of the day. And for that, we'll bring in our insider, and that is Brad Stainbrook. Brad, the injury report did come out today, and we've got a little bit of news coming out of that. So what do you make of the injury report?
Yeah, that is correct. So we have two players ruled out already. Chris Hubbard with triceps injury and Odell Beckham Jr., of course, still coming back from that ACL injury. Both of those players have already been ruled out. As you guys know, Odell Beckham Jr. did not play last week, and the Browns, like we've been saying all along, it looks like next week could be the first time we see Odell Beckham Jr. out there. But in terms of players questionable, we have Michael Dunn, Troy Hill, Anthony Schwartz, J.C. Treader, and Jedrick Wills. All those players are listed as questionable. But I did just get a text moments ago. Troy Hill is expected to play, I'm told, and Anthony Schwartz sounds like it's going to be shaping up to be a true game time decision. Anthony Walker, he's heading to the IR, and sources tell me Elijah Lee has been promoted to the 53-man roster. And that's not just for this week. This is a promotion permanently, probably until Anthony Walker is back. But Elijah Lee is back on the 53-man roster. He was with us last year as well. And then lastly, the green dot, as Anthony Walker is out, he was the play caller. Malcolm Smith will be taking on those responsibilities this week.
Great. So any other additional news coming out of the camp as far as our injuries goes? We had, like you said, you had mentioned, we have a call up here with Anthony Walker being out. Any other injury news after the first week against the Chiefs?
No more injury news, but we do have news on Reuben Foster, who did visit the team today, of course. They had the linebacker in Berea today for a visit and a physical. He passed the physical. Everything looked good medical-wise. However, I'm told the team they have no plans to sign the linebacker as of today. It sounds like the Browns just wanted to get in. This was a visit to get to know the player, and maybe down the road, if the Browns have a need at that position, which they probably will in a few weeks, they could revisit those talks. But I'm told Reuben Foster is on a flight already to Seattle to try out for the Seattle Seahawks. So he's going to continue his tour around the NFL trying to get back into the league.
Brad, the expectation this week on this show and many others was that John Johnson was going to have the green dot on the defensive side for the Browns. Ended up being Malcolm Smith. Any thoughts on your side? Any information as to why the Browns decided to go with that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I had to double check when I was told it was Malcolm Smith because I thought it would be John Johnson. It just sounds like Joe Woods, Kevin Stefanski, and the Browns are more comfortable with a linebacker holding that responsibility rather than a safety. I think that just comes down to a person and what they prefer. I think that just will, it just depends by the defensive coordinator, and Joe Woods felt more comfortable with Malcolm Smith.
Great. I know the offensive line a little bit dinged up as well, especially on that left-hand side protecting Baker Mayfield. Any news there on what the offensive line may be looking like starting on the left side?
Yeah, starting on the left side, of course, starting left tackle Jedrick Wills is questionable to play, and the backup Chris Hubbard has already been ruled out. So that means James Hudson or Blake Hanse, one of those guys will probably be getting the start at left tackle if Jedrick Wills can't go. The Browns and Kevin Stefanski said they've been working on James Hudson, and Blake Hanse, of course, you guys remember him from the playoffs. Either of those guys will be getting the start at left tackle. If I had to say right now, it's probably shaping up to be James Hudson if Jedrick Wills cannot give it a go.
Great. Thanks so much, Brad, for joining us. As always, if you want to hear more from Brad, you can check out our Rumor Central if you are subscribed on the OBR for more news. As always, thanks so much, Brad, for joining us, and we'll catch you on next week. Next up joining us here on the OBR Roundtable is our analytics guru, Cody Sook. Cody was not able to join us this week. However, he does have an article up on the OBR talking a little bit about the Texans, and here we have a little bit for you to take a look.
Good evening, Browns fans. Welcome to the Week 2 Roundtable. For tonight's analytics segment, we're going to focus on a game preview I published this morning. Takes a look at the key matchups, data, and two players that I consider the X factors for this week versus the Houston Texans. To start with, I want to look at what I believe will be the game plan on the offensive side of the football on Sunday afternoon. Last week, the Browns moved the ball with a 53-47 pass-to-run ratio. I think that ratio might be even more swayed towards the pass game this week if we look at how the Browns performed over the second half of last season. The formula was to pass the ball early on and often to gain a lead through the first 2 or 3 quarters, and then lean on the legs of Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb in the fourth quarter, where Nick Chubb had an astronomical 10 yards per carry last year in the fourth quarter to protect that lead. Something we're going to look at is what Anthony Reinhard, the co-analytics expert here at the OBR, spoke about earlier this summer in a VIP analytics piece, was looked at pass probability over expected. The Browns last year over the final 8 games had a pass probability over expected, or PPOE, of plus 3.8%, which was the 8th highest mark across the NFL from weeks 12 through the Super Bowl. That is something I expect to continue on Sunday, especially with the success of Baker Mayfield in the offense in week 1. If you look at how Baker Mayfield performed, he was 4th in completion percentage over expectation at 14.2%. He was 9th in EPA per dropback at 0.312, and he was 11th in success rate at 53%. And now he was also considered the most aggressive quarterback in week 1, where nearly a third of his throws were thrown into a tight window where a defender was within 1 yard or less of the receiver at the time of reception. The Texans defense played pretty well against the pass in week 1, allowing just negative 0.075 EPA per dropback. However, the Browns are far more advanced from a roster perspective and talent perspective than the rookie Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars. The next thing I want to look at is the Texans run game. That's going to be the focal point of the Browns, what they need to stop on Sunday afternoon. No team ran the ball more than the Texans in week 1. They had 41 rushing attempts, one of only 6 teams to rush the ball more than 30 or more times, 460 yards and 2 touchdowns. The leading rusher was veteran Mark Ingram. He toted the rock on 26 occasions for 85 yards, 3.3 yards per attempt, and 1 touchdown, while facing 8 or more defenders in the box on 50% of those carries. What I want to look at is how the Texans, although they had volume doesn't always necessarily mean success in the NFL or across any layer of football. So even though they ran the ball 41 times, they weren't the most efficient offense. The rushing attack was 18th in EPA per play at negative 0.14, 22nd in success rate at 32.4%, and they were 19th in rush defense adjusted value over average, or DVOA, at negative 23.5%. The 2 players I'm looking at here on the Brown side of the football are the Malik McDowell and Malik McJackson. Those guys are key players along the interior of the defensive line. The Browns defense played fairly well against the run in week 1, finishing 14th in EPA added per play at negative 0.161, and also 14th in success rate at 33.3%. In my opinion, the Browns should focus on stopping the run this week and force the Texans to beat them through the air, which brings me to my next point, which is pressuring Tyrod Taylor. He had a heck of a performance in week 1, kind of an uncharacteristic performance. He was third highest average completed air yards across all quarterbacks and the 6th most EPA per play. He's on his 3rd team in 4 seasons, but he predominantly serves as a bridge to another quarterback. However, you can't underestimate his abilities, especially when it comes to using his legs as a dual threat quarterback. But what I want to see from the Browns is to put pressure on him. He was pressured the 3rd most among all quarterbacks in week 1, where 48.6% of his dropbacks were under pressure. The main culprit of that pressure was former first-round pick Titus Howard, who finished with a lowly 41.4 pass block grade with 4 total pressures allowed, and when under true pass sets, he had a 0 pass grade. So this is where I want to see Myles Garrett and Jadavian Clowney really come in and collapse that pocket, contain Taylor in the pocket, and turn those pressures and quarterback hits into sacks. Next, and the final thing I will look at is the 2 players I think are the X factors in Sunday's game, and that's Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, JOK, and David Njoku. Speaking of pressuring Tyrod Taylor, I think JOK, even though he played 25 snaps last week, 60% of those were in coverage. I think he's going to take over that will linebacker spot and not look back the rest of the season. He's too explosive, too athletic, too good in coverage to be on the sidelines in place of somebody like number 51. The next is David Njoku. Talk about a guy that was one of our breakout players this summer. He's really coming along this season. He had played a heck of a game that in week 1 versus the Kansas City Chiefs. He led the team in receiving yards of 76, and he had 3 receptions. And he wasn't just playing at tight end. He was playing all over the field with 47%, set 47.6% of his snaps in line, 33% in the slot, and 19% out wide. He's going to play a pivotal role in the offense this week, especially in the absence of OBJ. One final thing I want to add is a key matchup this week, which is Denzel Ward versus Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks has been a model of consistency. Even though he's on a different team, it seems like every season he's done well with receiving grades of 70 or more, 1,000 receiving yards or more, and a passer rating when targeted of 100 or more in 5 of the last 6 seasons. And week 1, he was the focal point of their passing attack, accounting for a team leading share of air yards of 43.48%. This is the matchup to watch out in week 2. If the Browns can shut down Brandon Cooks with Denzel Ward, Taylor's going to be forced to look at guys like Pharaoh Brown or Damian Ndola, which is only going to prove successful and advantageous for the defense. In closing, this is a game the Browns should win this week. The Texans are far inferior from a roster and talent perspective. But as we all know, any given Sunday, if you don't show up and take care of business, you will lose a football game. But I wholeheartedly believe the Browns will show up. They're going to play with passion and vigor. They're going to take care of business, and they're going to leave no doubt they should be mentioned in the same breath as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Seattle Seahawks, and the Kansas City Chiefs as the best team in football. Take care, everybody.
And great stuff from Cody, as always. And joining me now here on the OBR Roundtable is the OBR's very own Phil expert, Jake Burns. And Jake, it is still the middle of September here on twitch.tv. And just like every other channel you can see here, actually, before we see, we've almost got a level 2 hype train. We've got a lot of subs in the last few minutes here. Again, all subs, 20% off. For the entire month of September. We'll be gifting out at least 5 subs every single one of these OBR roundtables. Congratulations to Smurfin, Diggy Mo, Kachows, SB, a bunch of numbers, and Moochie for getting those 5 subs for this week. If you do want to sub, it is 20% off for any level of subs for the entire month of September. So great time to get your subs in for Twitch. So Jake, this matchup coming up this week for the Browns, the Houston Texans, 37 points on offense from a Tyrod Taylor-led offense and 3 interceptions on the defensive side of the ball, matching their entire 2020 total for the defense for the Texans. So a lot to break down, a lot to go into. What have you been looking at for this week going into the Texans matchup?
You know, it's a really interesting game in terms of, you know, I talk about it all the time that the NFL is a desire business. It's a motivation business, and sometimes that plays a huge factor. There are times where, you know, you can overcome that with great coaching and talent, and you expect the Browns to do so. I do too. But when you look at the roster from Houston, yeah, they won 37-21, pretty comfortable win, but the yardage numbers were pretty similar for both teams, and the difference in this game was the 3 interceptions, like you referenced, 3 turnovers to none. So, excuse me, if that's going to be the difference, you got to hope that the Browns don't run into those situations, because the Texans are a middling team. I mean, they didn't tank the roster enough to be really heinous in terms of talent, but they also have a bunch of guys that can be okay, who they haven't caught the perfect situation for them, or they're in a spot where they maybe were cut because of injuries. So you think of me like Christian Kirksey, the leader of the defense, a guy who was cut from Cleveland in large part because of the injury history, right? Like, that's the reason he was let go or moved on from Cleveland. It wasn't because when Kirksey was playing, he couldn't play. He could play, but that's a big reason why he wasn't, you know, kept in Cleveland. Or go to Tyrod Taylor, a guy who just is always been okay. He's just been serviceable for so long. He's obviously let go from Cleveland because of Baker Mayfield's arrival, but I think, you know, look at the same thing that happens to him out in LA. So, you know, Houston's roster's full of those guys. I mean, these are names you've heard, right? And a lot of Cleveland names, you know, a lot of teams, players that were in Cleveland at one time. So this has the smell of like a former Browns player's revenge game sort of vibe, right? So, you know, names that you've heard: Pharaoh Brown, Tyrod Taylor, guys that have been in Cleveland. They had Duke Johnson on the practice squad for a little bit. I think I could be wrong about that. as far as the offensive side of the football goes. Justin McCray, an offensive lineman with Cleveland ties. You go to defense, Kirksey, who we referenced before, in the back half, Eric Murray, Tavares Thomas, and Mitchell, right? The corner. So you're looking at a bunch of former Browns, of guys that have connections to time spent in Cleveland at some point. Offensively, they're nothing spectacular, but they're just solid NFL players, right? Running backs, Mark Ingram, a guy who's been around the league and been successful wherever he's been for the most part, replaced in Baltimore. I bet they wish they had him back right now. A guy that was replaced there. Phillip Lindsay, Rex Burkhead, David Johnson, all guys who have been a part of successful situations, right, in their careers, but maybe their most recent one, they weren't guys that were, a part of the future of what they wanted to become with that current stable franchise that they were with. So, excuse me, I'm dealing with a little bit of a cold. You look at, again, wide receiver position, Danny Amendola. He's been around the league forever. Chris Conley, Kansas City to Jacksonville, bounced around. These are guys who led them in targets. Brandon Cooks, New England, St. Louis, New England and then Los Angeles Rams. Like, he's been around too. So it's a bunch of older, like, not career over type guys, but a bunch of older guys, right, who are that make the Texans roster the oldest roster in the NFL, but not guys who are a total group like over 30, but they're just a bunch of solid veteran players who are past their rookie kind of angle and those contracts that typically last 4 years, and they're on to a phase in their career that's just kind of strange. So it's like a ragtag bunch. They're better than like you think of the movie with guys coming together, making it like the Replacements. They're not scab players. These are NFL players, but they're guys who have been cast off from their former place. So they're rallying behind that idea. On my podcast, I talked to a Texans guest, and that's like what their rallying cry is. Nobody wanted us. We have all kind of settled into a location where it's a bunch of misfits, guys who have been let go, and they're bonding behind that idea. Now, the 37-21 score, I think, again, a little misleading from week one, but they're not that bad. I mean, they're a team that if you don't show up and play well, they'll hang around. I don't love a 12.5-point line. It makes me nervous and uncomfortable. I don't like it at all. But again, the Browns have to show up and do their job. It's a huge do your job type of game because I don't see Houston just simply handing the game over to Cleveland. Like, they're two these guys, veteran guys, grown men with, wives and kids, and these dudes are playing for NFL survival. So they're not going to be a team who just folds up and lets it happen without really putting up much of an attempt. So, can the Browns create negative plays? Can they get a couple turnovers? Can they run the football effectively? I think when you look at Houston, their defense, I think you can run the football on them, and I think you can pick on their corners, who I do not think are very good football players. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. It's a team that's dangerous because it's a bunch of guys who have either been in winning environments or know what it takes to win in the NFL. They're not as skilled as, obviously most of these guys were cast-offs from other places, but they're a team that gets behind a clear message, a clear rallying cry, and that sort of thing can bond a group together that nobody believes in us. As we know, your Cleveland Browns, right, are the perfect example of it last year when nobody believed in them to do so many things at the end of the year. So it's a phrase for a reason. Any given Sunday, it can happen. So what you have to do is show up ready to play. It's a very, very winnable game. If you take care of business and do your job, I don't think there'll be any reason that the Browns shouldn't be able to prevail in this game. But I also don't think it's as big a pushover as a lot of people want to make it out to be. So we'll see what happens here. But as far as like the 12.5-point line, a team coming off a nice week one win, the Texans are feeling pretty good, and they'll show up to First Energy Stadium with a lot of confidence.
So like you said, or we had mentioned, 21 points by the Trevor Lawrence offense, a rookie, and a number of very other young players on that offense for Jacksonville. So to cover that 12.5 point spread, Browns are definitely going to have to put up a lot of points there. So is what is really going to be their secret to success establishing that offense early? Are they going to look to really attack that weak defensive line and try to control the game? Or, like you mentioned, pick on some of those cornerbacks and just try to strike early and often?
Yeah, I would imagine Cleveland will try to hit some big plays offensively, some play action throws, test them down the field. What you'd love to do is get up 14 points on these guys early and then let your running game close it out, milk the clock, long drives, 10, 11, 12 play drives. That's what you would love. You don't want to fall behind because that's an annoying thing to have to fight back against a team like this. So I would expect Cleveland tries to jump out and play from ahead. I think the Texans are going to try to throw the football. Again, they threw the football 33 times last week. They ran because the game was over. A team that throws 33 times and scores 37 points and wins by 16 points, that tells you they threw it in front. So Tyrod, we all think is obviously a guy who you can beat. We've seen Tyrod up close and personal, not a ton to be afraid of. But if you give him easy throws, he's going to make some throws. Like, you got to get pressure on him. You got to make his receivers uncomfortable. And I think the Browns will have every opportunity to do that. I think the Texans are a little better on the offensive line than people want to give them credit for as they've come along here. But, yeah, the ideal outcome from this game is a 14-0 or 14-3 lead at the end of the first quarter, where you're playing from out in front and you can let 27 and you can let 24 sort of lead the way with some rushing attacks and some drives that eat up 6, 7, 8, 9 minutes in a quarter at any given moment. So that's sort of to me, that's the ideal outcome, where you get out in front and then let your running game and what your guys do best up front control the rest of the clock.
Talking again about the Texans personnel, you mentioned a lot of them really kind of old grizzled veterans that have, seen either very successful programs one way or another. Have they mixed in, or do they have any of those really just kind of very talented, looking to break out kind of players that are kind of hidden on this roster?
For the Texans, I mean, the guy on the offensive side of the football, one of the few young bright spots they have, because they haven't had many picks, is Nico Collins. He's a wide receiver. He's a Michigan kid. He was taken in the 3rd round. And we all talk about Donovan Peoples-Jones. There's a big thing about loving Donovan because of what he was dealing with at Michigan, and a guy who's explosive. He's a player, a big physical frame. I think that's the same thing with Nico Collins, an even more talented player. When I was watching Michigan play, right, like it was Nico who's the guy who caught my eye all the time. So I think he opted out of 2020 as well. So that, to me, is a guy that I'm paying attention to, because he's one of the few bright, young, talented players on this team, and they don't have very many. So Nico's a guy you maybe haven't heard of, and you'll want to pay attention. He's number 12. They'll try to get him the football a little bit. They gave him 3 targets last week. I expect that to jump up a little bit this week, so pay attention to him.
All right, we got a question from the chat coming from Dadbod coming in this time. Does Malcolm Smith slide into that Mike spot this week?
I think it's the most logical thing. They could move Mack Wilson over, but I don't know. Based on his most recent performance, I'm not sure that that's the most wise angle to take with him. So I would suspect if I was a betting man, I would say 56 Malcolm Smith is comfortable with the. Now, he played pretty poorly week 1. There's no denying that, but he knows the defense well. He can play a rangy enough position there at Mike, and he can run down the middle of the field a little bit and cover 2. So I would suspect he is the logical slide over where the green Mike. Now, they could put that burden on Elijah Lee, and that's number 52 that they just brought up from the practice squad, who played a lot of Mike Backer in the preseason. They could ask him to do that, but my best guess is to ask Malcolm to do it, and he'll be your play caller. They could go John Johnson there too. There's a number of different routes they could go. So I don't think it's a situation where people should panic. There's a lot of panic on the timeline today. You're going to lose people to injury throughout the season, so you got to figure out a way to still get it done. And I think they have enough talent to still get it done at that position.
Mm-hmm. If any other folks in the chat do have some questions, feel free to type them in. We will definitely try to get to as many questions that we do have throughout the roundtable this evening. Question following up a little bit is something about what Brad said. Any thoughts on James Hudson possibly being the starting left tackle? Like Hanse a real option if Hudson hasn't gotten to that point where he can start in that position?
Well, I've seen the Browns overcome worse, right? Like, I've seen them overcome situations where guys hadn't even met before, and just some crazy situations. So I'm not going to lose sleep over the need to start James Hudson. I thought he had a nice third preseason game. It's either him or Blake Hanse. Blake Hanse is not a tackle. He's not. It was not a tackle last year. He was a guard who had to play tackle in the postseason game in Kansas City because they had nobody else at some point. He's got enough in his hands there trying to play guard if he gets his snaps at guard. So I will. They'll figure out a way to help James Hudson. It's not a bad week to need that guy. Now next week is different because it's Khalil Mack. That changes things a little bit because they can put Khalil Mack wherever they want to and feast on him. And that's never a good outcome. So I would say I'm not going to lose sleep over James Hudson starting this week again. I think they'll use tight end help, running back help to be there for him. So Hudson is probably the most logical left tackle starter this week. And I don't think you need to have a bunch of panic over. Is it the most ideal thing? No, but getting Jed's ankle healthy and Chris Hubbard's tricep for the next 2 weeks after, to me, is far more important.
Question again from the chat from a Sipper Bowl. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but yeah, Anthony Schwartz not practicing this week, having some issues with his knee. Is he going to be okay? What have you heard? What do you think his role will be, or how limited? Or
I'm not sure what happened with the knee. I didn't hear anything in the post game, and could have been something that happened in practice or weights or something. I don't know. I'm not sure, but I would imagine he'll be out there. I'll be pretty surprised if he's not. We would be getting a worse vibe about that. He'd be do not, DNPing right now. The did not practice label. So I will suspect he's out there. I think he's proven himself in week 1 to be a pretty dangerous threat. I expect him to be 30, 40 snaps again, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's pushing for targets as well. I don't think that Houston will play a similar defense to Kansas City. Kansas City's a lot of walk down in your face, play zero, late disguise shifting team. But they'll play a lot of man-to-man, as we saw in that opener. They'll challenge your receivers at the line of scrimmage. Houston's defensive coordinator is Lovie Smith. Yes, that Lovie Smith that you remember, former Chicago Bears head coach, had dabbled in Illinois the last few years and is now back in the league. He is one of the innovators of Tampa 2. He is one of the early users. So a lot of cover 2 and in cover 2, if you know that, and you remember it from Joe Schobert's time in Cleveland when they ran a lot of it, and they mix in what's called Tampa 2, which would be your Mike linebacker, kind of runs deep middle. He's responsible for deep middle, and you got to have an athletic guy there. So we'll see what they do. But I, from watching what I've watched of the week 1 game, I see a lot of cover 2, a lot of quarters, and that's what they'll try to be. And we'll see what the Browns do to attack it, but they should have some nice opportunities to get some easier, less contested throws for their quarterback. And with that, you hope Schwartz can catch a ball maybe on a shallow cross, a drag and over route where he's stretching the field horizontally and maybe running away from some people.
We've got a question from Chubb Salutely. Everyone's got some pretty good names here, I got to say. How worried should we be about the Texans running RPO, as the Browns seem to struggle on defense with that, especially the linebackers?
Everybody does. RPOs are hell, man. Like, every team's RPOs if you have a guy who can do it right. I don't think Tyrod does it even in the same zip code as Pat Mahomes. I'm not all too worried about it. I mean, if the Browns can't adjust, maybe they get bit by a couple of them, but if they can't adjust and figure it out with Tyrod, then you probably deserve to lose. So I'm not gonna sit here and fret about RPOs. Like, it's a good question. I'm just not gonna sit and sort of fret about RPOs when I don't think they have the quarterback that can hurt you and the guy who kind of plays that tight slot in Kelsey. They don't have that player. Pharaoh Brown, I've got respect for the guy, but come on, Travis Kelce's a Hall of Famer, so it's a different animal there.
A question from D. Whalen. Do we see more nickel and dime versus Houston, even if they run more, based on having the best players in the field, or keeping more of a base like they did against Kansas City?
They'll match personnel. I don't have any evidence that they won't match personnel. So if you see two running backs, one back, one fullback, or if you see a couple tight ends, 12 personnel or 20, even 22 personnel, you want to get real crazy, they'll match it. They'll play 3 linebackers. Again, I don't have any idea that they wouldn't do that based on what we saw last week. So be prepared for that, which means Sione Takitaki comes on the field. They might sub out Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah for Mack Wilson, as was their plan last week in base sets. If you get a lot of 11, you get a lot of 10. I don't think you see much 10. But if you get a team that plays a lot of 12 personnel, maybe empty or 3-by-1, they use that second tight end as a wide receiver. I don't think Houston does that. So I would expect to see more base, more nickel sets this week. And then as the season wears on, they'll keep exposing Grant Delpit more and more and giving him more opportunities to slide into the box and do some of those fun things. So pay attention to how many guys they have on the front. Do they play 3-man fronts? Do they play 4-man fronts? And then we'll worry about defensive personnel after the game. But I think they're going to keep matching what the offense does to try to put themselves in the best position there.
Awesome. Thanks so much for all of the questions from the folks joining us in chat. Jake, any last thoughts at all about the matchup going into this final or second weekend?
No, it should be a game the Browns win. I don't know that I feel comfortable betting 12.5 points on it, but Browns should win it. It'll be the first time First Energy Stadium has been packed in a couple years. If you're going to the game, have fun, be safe, enjoy yourself, and make it loud in there, man. Make it loud because it'll be a huge advantage. As we saw the advantage Kansas City had in week 1, making it hard on Cleveland, you need to bring the same thing, and I'm sure fans will. So have fun with that, be safe, and we'll be here at the OBR ready to break it down right after.
All right, I believe the largest spread of the Browns since 1999, or for the Browns, if I am correct. So
I would imagine also one of the larger one-win-loss 0-1 team spread over a 1-0 team spread in NFL history. I don't have that data in front of me, but I couldn't imagine many bigger than that one. So yeah, it's like if you're a gambling man, maybe that's the play. They're trying to scare people away, get a ton of people to take that, and then Cleveland wins like 34-17 or something. Then Vegas is laughing to the bank. So that's why I don't bet, Corey. I don't bet, man, because I'm not that good at that stuff. I just talk about the film and the players.
Exactly.
And
there are people in Vegas sitting there that are getting paid quite a bit of money to figure out the exact perfect number to fool some of us into it and some of us not. So
that is the truth, man. Thanks for having me, guys. We'll see you. I'll see you on the pregame show on Sunday.
Sounds good. Thanks for joining us, Jake. Appreciate it as always. All right, next up, joining us on the OBR roundtable is our beat reporter, the legend Fred Greedham. Fred, we've got some thoughts from you on David Njoku after the first week. What did he show you, and what do you expect from the tight end going forward?
Well, I think that we've always known that he's quite a weapon, and I think he showed it last week. You know, he had those 3 catches down the field. You know, you got a guy 6'5", 246 that can run like a deer, and he creates a mismatch problem. And I think that he's got himself, you know, he's got his mind right. Last year he asked to be traded, felt disrespected when they went out and got Austin Hooper and Harrison Bryant in the draft. But I think he realized that they really did want him here, and they had a role for him here. They picked up his option for $6.1 million this year. And that's when he said he really knew they were committed to him. And I think now, you know, he's got his mind right. He's decided to be a blocker and to do some of the dirty work that he called. He didn't do that, wasn't asked to do that in his career up until last year. And in the second half of the year, he actually embraced it. And down the stretch, I thought he was one of the best tight ends. In fact, I thought he was the best tight end on the roster. And he's kind of come into training camp with that same mentality. And he fired his agent, went back to the agent that he had when the Browns drafted him. And he actually said he wants to be with the Browns long term. Now, whether that happens or not, it's going to depend on how much money he asks for and so forth. But for the 2021 season, I really think that, you know, he could have a monster year because with all the weapons on this Browns offense, they can only cover so many on defense. They have to decide, do we double team an OBJ when he plays, or an Anthony Schwartz, or Jarvis Landry, or Austin Hooper, or Nick Chubb, or Kareem Hunt out of the backfield. You even got a Harrison Bryant. And so Njoku with his size and speed can really, you know, create a big mismatch. And I think you're going to see that more and more as the season goes on. Not every game he's going to have a big game, but there's going to be games where, you know, they choose to put a linebacker or a smaller defensive back on him, and I think he'll take advantage of that. So the defenses can only cover so many guys, and you know, and I think that's the best thing going is that he's bought in to the Kevin Stefanski offense, and I think it bodes well for the Browns offense to have another weapon like him.
So the Browns officially announced that Chris Hubbard was out today, and Jedrick Wills also remains questionable. Are you currently concerned a little bit about the Browns' offensive line, or how are they looking there? We've talked a lot about that tonight.
Well, I think, they started the week with 4 offensive linemen not practicing. 3 were starters, but J.C. Treader and Jack Conklin were both at practice today. They'll play. And so, yeah, you just have one, and it's a big piece. Your left tackle protects the backside of your quarterback. And I don't expect Wills to play. I mean, he was out on the field today during practice that we were allowed to watch, but after we went in, coach said he didn't do anything other than worked on the side with the trainers. I saw him walk off the field, and he looked like he had a slight limp. And usually, if somebody's limping at all, they're not going to play. But I could be wrong. I think they're holding out hope, but I think if he's not really 100%, they'll probably hold him out. That would leave the next guy up. The only other tackle on the active roster is rookie James Hudson, who kind of had an inconsistent preseason, didn't look like he was ready. Alex Van Pelt, the offensive coordinator, said that he's been trending up and doing better in practices. Of course, we don't get to see practices, but I would kind of guess that they would go with him because he's been playing tackle. And the other option would be Blake Hanse. For the fans to remember, Blake Hanse was the guy that went in last year at the end of the year. They signed him off the Jets practice squad, a guard, but he actually played left tackle in that win over the Steelers in the playoffs because Jedrick Wills went down like the first or second play with a high ankle sprain, and Kendall Lamb, his backup, got hurt, and Hanse moved out to left tackle by necessity. So he's been playing guard as far as we know all training camp. He might have been working at tackle this week. We don't know because we don't see practice. But I would think if Wills doesn't play, it'll be Hudson or Hanse out at left tackle. Either way, I expect them to use a lot of 3 tight ends, and they'll use, them to help out there. I also expect them to run to the right side a lot, just to be safe. But, I mean, Hudson, obviously a 4th-round pick. They have high expectations of him, but he was inactive last week, so that'd be a tall order, his first game to start at left tackle. I think sometimes guys like that could break in more on the right side, but I don't think they want to play around and move Batonio to left tackle or Conklin to left tackle. So I think they'll keep those 4 guys intact, but don't be surprised if you see a Blake Hanse out there or James Hudson. But I think they'll have tight end help over there.
Has Malik McDowell been available to reporters or done a press conference? Question from Sancho Bermuda. Glad he's doing better. How is he doing?
Yeah, we talked to him after he made the team. That was really the first time. And we haven't talked to him since. That was before the first game. But we've talked to Jadavian Clowney today about him, and he's very impressed with what he's done. This guy hadn't played in the game in 5 years, going back to college at Michigan State. Never got on the field with some injuries and then off the field legal problems after he was drafted very high in the 2nd round by the Seahawks. So I think he's a work in progress, but you can see glimpses, saw it throughout the preseason. In his first game, he started against the Chiefs. First play, he pushed the pile and stopped Clyde Hoyer-Edwards for like a 2-yard loss in the first play. So I think he's been impressive, and I think he'll only get better because, I mean, you just don't jump into the NFL without even having any experience at all. And he's been able to hold his own, actually win the starting job, it appears, because they moved him up to the first team on the depth chart. So he's replaced Andrew Billings. So we'll see what all happens there. But I think everything, the arrow's pointing up, so to say, with Malik McDowell. And I think he's only going to get better the more and more experience he gets.
Do you expect any additional roster moves before game day on Sunday? We know Elijah Lee was brought up from and promoted up to the active roster. Any other moves that you see happening between now and then?
Yeah, I know Stefanski today, when he was asked who'll replace Anthony Walker, he said Malcolm Smith or Elijah Lee. Elijah Lee was brought up from the practice squad last week and active for the game. He went back to the practice squad unless something happened late today I didn't see. But since Stefanski said he was a candidate to start, I'm assuming he will be activated again this week and play, in the linebacker role. So, yeah, I think it'll be one of those two. I think Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah will get more playing time as they ramp him up. I wrote a story about that a couple days ago. The more comfortable he is, they're going to give him a little more each week, because I think they really look at him as a big part of the defense at linebacker, regardless of the exact role. I mean, we're talking about the middle linebacker, the Mike, is what Anthony Walker played. But I think JOK can kind of move around and do different things. But I expect Malcolm Smith and Elijah Lee to primarily fill the Walker role. You'll see Sion Taki a little bit more, and Mac Wilson maybe as well. So it'll be a committee job, but you might see, only two linebackers, a majority of the time. You might only see one linebacker. I think they will rearrange a little bit with their scheme. Well, last year they were dinged up at linebacker, and Joe Woods, kind of rotated around a bunch of different guys. So I think you got a lot of the same characters, other than JOK back. And so you'll see the same type of approach this week.
Thanks so much, as always, Fred. Thank you all for a couple good questions from the chat as well. And if it's all right, Fred, with you, we'll have you stick around for our final thoughts in just a moment. But before we do get to that, we are going to bring on to the OBR roundtable the big kahuna himself, Barry Bride, the publisher of the OBR. Barry, who probably a couple of bourbons deep at this point, like I know a few of us may be in the chat. And of course, that's a perfect number of bourbons to talk about everyone's favorite, absolutely obnoxious nemesis, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers, who snuck away with the win in the first week.
Yeah, they did it with defense. They did it with special teams. They certainly didn't do it with what they displayed on offense. But T.J. Watt, of course, being a pest, 2 sacks and forced fumble for him. They had some fourth down stops against the Bills that put them in bad situations. And they're going to see how they fare against the Raiders this week. I would say that Pittsburgh's offensive line is still struggling a bit. They aren't knitting together real fast. And they're going to be going up against Max Crosby and Yannick Ngakoue of the Raiders. And that could present a problem for them. The Raiders, in the meantime, have to stop Watt and Melvin Ingram and the rest of the annoying Steelers defense. Going to be a good game. I think it's a toss-up, but the Steelers are playing at home, so I think the Steelers are going to wind up beating the Raiders this week.
The Cincinnati Bengals came away with what was a bit of a surprise win in the first week. Their win over the Minnesota Vikings. The Bengals, of course, reuniting Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, so they've got that connection going again. So what was it about that game that you believe? Was it kind of the Vikings sort of throwing the game away? Did the Bengals have a bit there going, and they're able to pull that win away themselves?
I think it's because the triplets, the offensive skill players of the Bengals, simply outmatched the Vikings. Everything worked the way it was supposed to for the Cincinnati Bengals last week. You had Joe Burrow go 20 of 27 with 2 touchdowns. Joe Mixon, who people hadn't really been talking about before the game, got 127 yards. He leads the league right now in yardage by a running back. And this Jamar Chase fellow, 5 catches for 101 yards and a TD, plus posterizing Patrick Peterson, the 8-time Pro Bowler of the Vikings, shows that he is going to be a force to be reckoned with. Now, I, like a lot of people, thought the Bengals were insane for passing on the best available left tackle in the draft for Jamar Chase. But so far, it's Bengals 1, consensus of every sane person in the football universe 0. And they did very well last week. This week, they face the Bears, and they have a couple of challenges in the secondary. Ricardo Allen was injured. He was sort of the third safety, and the Bengals like to play that 3-safety set. So that's going to hold him back a little bit. And quarterback Trey Waynes is out. So Eli Apple will start against the Bears. The much-traveled Eli Apple, ex-Buckeye, is going to fill that role. And we'll see how he does. I think that the Bears are going to bring the Bengals back down to earth where they belong. Despite the QB questions in Chicago, I think they're going to come out on top of the Bengals next week by a couple of points.
And finally, we have the first Monday night game of the season that most people will probably not want to remember very much. Neither team looking to try to win the game, apparently. But, of course, there had to be a victor of a result of some kind, and it was the Raiders taking down the Ravens on Monday night. So how are the Ravens looking, or how'd you feel about that game, Barry?
Well, I always feel badly about the Ravens just in general. But in terms of their situation, they're having almost Brownsian bad luck this year. I mean, with injuries, it's just a joke. I mean, Ronnie Stanley, their offensive tackle, is going to be out. Their starting left guard is going to be out. Of course, they've lost, half a school bus of running backs already. And they'll also be without Chris Westry. So they are a mess. Lamar Jackson tries to cancel all that out himself. He was he had more running attempts than anybody else on his team last week. Now, Lamar Jackson's a special talent, but if your quarterback is running that much, that means your quarterback's taking a lot of hits. And that's not necessarily what you want to see, is Lamar Jackson putting the whole game on his shoulders and trying to run the ball instead of having a balanced running attack behind him, which they haven't. Of course, they are going to place they're going to play the Chiefs, right? And they're going to play them at home. So you like to give them a chance, but the Chiefs have beaten Lamar Jackson and the Ravens each time they've played, right? The Chiefs are a nemesis for these Baltimore Ravens. I don't see that stopping with all the injuries in Baltimore. And I think the Chiefs are going to go to 2-0, and the Ravens are going to go 0-2. And I don't think it's necessarily going to be a close game.
I think the Ravens starting off 0-2 is probably not something on everyone's early predictions. And potentially if Cincinnati starts 2-0, we could have quite the interesting starts to the AFC North to start the year. So, Barry, thanks as always for bringing us around the rest of the AFC North. Our final thoughts and predictions are coming up here once again here in just a minute. But before we do that, Barry, we've got a pregame show coming up on Sunday at noon, I believe.
Yes, coming to you at noon on Sunday, live from Old River Tap and Social, they call it. They've got like a tap and eating area, and then they've got the social room in the back. We're going to be in the social room and taking questions during the pregame from the crowd there, as well as everybody who's watching. And so we'll run that for an hour, and then after the game, we will be back on Twitch doing our post-game analysis of what is hopefully the Browns' first win of the year.
Awesome. Yep. Bit of an earlier game start this week, the 1 p.m. So sounds great. Also, we've got tomorrow, 11 a.m. before all the college games start. We've got Steven's draft show right here on twitch.tv/the OBR _Browns. Can't say underscore tonight for some reason. So be sure to be tuned in 11 a.m. there, catching all of your thoughts on some of the players to look at for some potential draft potentials for the upcoming 2022 NFL draft. Final thoughts. Browns versus Texans coming up here on Sunday. Let's go ahead and put our money where our mouth is, talk about predictions and score predictions. Fred, we'll start with you.
Well, I think that with this Browns crowd is waiting to erupt. Last year the team turned around for the first time in ages, and nobody was able to really celebrate. Maybe 12,000 people was the most. No Muni lot, no tailgating. Everybody's at home watching the TV going, yay, Browns. They want to be high-fiving and partying with everybody else. I think it's going to be so noisy down there that I just believe the Browns will feed off that crowd. I don't see the game close. I see the Browns winning easily 35-17. With that said, I think the Texans, present some problems, but I just think that they're going to be overmatched, this week, despite maybe not having their left tackle.
35-17 will cover that spread. So Barry, what are you thinking about the Texans versus Browns on Sunday?
Well, I keep changing my mind on this one, not on who's going to win, but what the margin's going to be. I started off thinking, is this going to be a boat race? The Browns are just going to clobber them 34-6 or something like that. But now with the Hudson news, listening to Jake just a few minutes ago talk about how capable the Texans are, I'm looking at them a little bit less like they're the island of misfit Browns, although there's 8 or 9 ex-Browns on that team. I think the Browns will win. I think they'll win convincingly. And I think despite our challenges at left tackle, I think the key is going to be the Browns' top-rated offensive line against the Texans' lower-rated, almost at the bottom of the league, defensive line. And when you have that sort of an advantage in the trenches, you can hold on to that ball all day. And that's going to keep the score down. It's going to allow the Browns to run the clock after they've gotten a quick lead. I think it's going to be more like 24, let's say 24-14, something around those lines. Cleveland Browns going to 1-1.
Very important game coming up, of course, the home opener. Fans are very excited. Got to get in the win column to start off the year, to start things off right. So we wish the best of luck to the Browns as they go into this matchup on Sunday against the Houston Texans. Fred, Barry, thank you both so much for joining us here on the roundtable this week. We appreciate it as always. Hope the two of you have a great weekend. Thanks to Jake and Cody and everyone else, for Brad, for joining us this week. We'll see you for tomorrow at the draft show at 11 and the pregame for the big game on Sunday. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. Have a great weekend.